Hello, Dr. Gentry. I'm Mercer Sport from Pensacola, Florida. And my question for you is, you built a portion of your argument on audience relevance. Is there any historical evidence to back up that the first century Christians really understood this message of encouragement that was meant for them?
If men do not understand it, if the early church didn't understand it, that doesn't mean it wasn't true. That just simply meant they didn't understand it. So we could theoretically allow that the early church did not understand the book of Revelation as it was written. But Revelation's message is not a message tied simply to the book of Revelation. It's all throughout the New Testament. In Matthew 24, he talks about the destruction of the temple. In Matthew 20 through 23, he gives one parable after another that deals with the same events as the book of Revelation. 2 Thessalonians 2, the book of Hebrews, James, and 1 Peter, all of these indicate that the destruction of the temple was something of great significance in the first century. So the book of Revelation is simply saying the same thing as these various other prophecies are. But, as a matter of fact, due to the chaos, the very nature of the judgment and the scattering of the people that occurred during the Jewish war in AD 70, we have very few records of Christianity. You read a history book on church history regarding what happens from AD 70 to about AD 90. You find there's very little information that you can discern at all. No contemporary documents survive to inform us what the people believed after the events happened and the people right in that day. Later sources, though, tell us that many Christians understood the New Testament and the problems of AD 70. For instance, Eusebius, writing about AD 330 or 340, tells us that the Christians fled Jerusalem when they saw the Roman armies because, as a matter of fact, they remembered the word of Jesus in Matthew 24 in that case. But remember, the Olivet Discourse says the same thing as the book of Revelation. Several commentators in the early church indicate an awareness that these prophecies were going to be fulfilled by the Roman general Titus, for instance. Those by Andreas and Aretas of Cappadocia. The Syriac versions of the book of Revelation indicate an awareness that it was written under Nero and had reference to Nero by some of the notations found therein. So we do find some evidence from later Christianity, but still very early, that the book of Revelation was understood in this light. But the very nature of the judgment and the scattering of the people and the lack of documentary evidence would tell us that we couldn't necessarily point to particulars from people in AD 70, 71, 72, because we simply don't have those records. Besides that, the purpose of Revelation is wider than simply warning Christians to flee Jerusalem. The question really assumes that it was for that particular purpose alone. But as a matter of fact, Revelation not only warns them to flee, but it tells us, explains to us the collapse of Jerusalem, which, as a matter of historical fact, according to Acts chapter 8 and Acts chapter 15, was the headquarters of the Christian church. The book of Revelation is going to give us a word from God explaining the collapse of Jerusalem. Christians are not to fear that the church is collapsing in this. It's a collapse of Jerusalem and therefore the collapse of Israel. That's the point. So the church is getting an explanation from God through visionary form that Jerusalem is going to collapse. Don't worry. The church has been headquartered there, but it doesn't need Jerusalem. Furthermore, Revelation demonstrates God's concern for His people. It demonstrates that God vindicates the righteous and that He protects the righteous in their times of trial, either by accepting them into heaven at the throne of God, which is far more blessed than being on the earth, or by rescuing His people in time of trouble. There are various ways that God defends and protects His people. So we have various reasons for Revelations being written, and we also have these reasons that inform us why we might not find too much documentary evidence in the decade of the 70s and the 80s as to why Revelation or whether Revelation was understood by the Christians that endured the events.